Welcome to Rhyl Riddles, a podcast series looking at the many riddles, myths and mysteries of Rhyl. An audio investigation into Rhyl's unusual history. From the weird and wonderful to the spooky and surreal. Join me as we venture back into Rhyl's past.
This episode, The Mystery of Rhyl's Hovercraft. We once again present a nautical tale from Rhyl's maritime past. This one has similarities with a previous episode, that of Rhyl's submarine, the Resurgam. Both have the same level of inventiveness, dedication, sheer imagination and passion, but ultimately ended in disaster. In the case of the submarine, the Resurgam, sadly that project had hardly begun before its fate was sealed. However, the Rhyl Hovercraft service had actually become a reality, but its sudden disappearance and what became of it has over the decades become a mystery. To many people at the time, the actual thought of a hovercraft service between Rhyl, North Wales and Wallasey on the Wirrel was a ridiculous thing, and even today many people don't believe it was actually a reality. It is probably fair to say that you wouldn't expect either Rhyl or Wallasey to be at the forefront of a pioneering transport system, yet these two towns were at either end of the world's first hovercraft passenger service, which operated between them for a very brief period in the early 60s. The hovercraft had been patented only 7 years earlier by Christopher Cockerell. He had worked on airborne navigation systems during the war, while employed by the wireless company Marconi. He had left them in 1950 and had retired into peacetime life as a boat builder, and bought Rhyl, an unprofitable boat and caravan company based in East Anglia, which he turned into a flourishing concern. He had a passion for boats, and in 1955 he had an idea to increase the speed of his boats other than by increasing their engine capacity. He used everyday items such as an empty cat food tin, a coffee tin and a hairdryer to demonstrate his unique concept, and soon built a viable working model of an air cushion vehicle. His inventiveness and engineering led to what became known as the hovercraft. He concluded that if the entire craft were lifted from the water, the craft would effectively have no drag. This, he conjectured, would give the craft the ability to attain a much higher speed, an invention which the Patents Office did not know whether to class as an aircraft or a boat, and which the government, when they heard of it, insisted be developed in secrecy. The hovercraft was finally declassified in 1959.
In 1959, the brainchild of a British inventor, the hovercraft shook the world when it made its first public appearance. And for the inventor, ex-boat builder Christopher Cockerell, part of a dream had come true. But what has happened to the hovercraft since then? 4 years after Britain pioneered the hovercraft, the world's first hovercraft passenger service started from Rhyl in North Wales to Wallasey on the Wirrel. With 6 trips a day each way at £1 a trip, passengers flocked to book their seats. The world's first mail to be delivered by hovercraft also went aboard the VA3. Using the beach as a terminal, the hover coach was ready to leave. Its lifting engines ease it down to the water. And the spray flies. Spray was one of the problems of the earlier hovercraft, but as the craft go faster, it's considerably reduced. What's it like to drive? Like a car on ice, says 41 years old chief test pilot Les Cahoon. At 70 miles an hour, VA3 rides 3 feet clear of the water, like a low-flying aeroplane. But compared with an aeroplane of the same weight, the hovercraft needs only 1/4 of the power for the same speed. Ideal for sea trips up to 100 miles, the larger hovercraft of today would make excellent long-distance ferries. Passenger fares would work out at about threepence a mile, the same as a bus. The 15-mile Rhyl to Wallasey trip, which normally takes 2 hours by road, is a 20-minute hop for VA3. With congested air traffic and overcrowded roads, this new vehicle is undoubtedly an important form of transport of the future. And there are plans for a 10,000-ton ocean-going hovercraft traveling at 250 miles an hour within the next 10 years. Leading the world now, Britain's new hovercraft industry should be given one order only: full speed ahead.
In 1960, British United Airways was formed from a merger of smaller companies, and it was they who decided to operate a test passenger service between Rhyl and Wallasey. Cockerell's latest model hovercraft, a VA3 Vickers Armstrong craft of 54 feet in length and 27 feet in breadth, was shipped around the coast from Southampton to the Mersey. It was then driven to Rhyl, where it arrived on the 19th of July 1962. It was to be based at Horton's Nose at the Volred Harbour. The hovercraft weighed 12 tons, had a range of 100 miles and could reach speeds of 60 knots. In charge on its inaugural cruise were to be Captain L.R. Colquhoun and Captain R.T. Old. At 9:30 on the morning of July 20th, a large crowd had gathered to see the hovercraft make her first passage of the 17 miles across the waters to Wallasey. On board were 24 passengers, together with 2 mail bags containing 8,181 items as official mail on the journey from Rhyl to Wallasey, including 450 copies of the Daily Mail souvenir edition. On the return journey, 1,800 letters and 800 Daily Mails were carried. The newspapers bore a special pictorial wrapper. These letters and papers are now collector's items. Passengers were given a souvenir certificate to commemorate their journey. The youngest passenger was 21 months old, Martin Jones, who travelled with his mother, Mrs. Millie Jones, an usherette at the Odeon Cinema, along with his grandmother, Mrs. Jean Morris, and Mrs. Morris's 14-year-old son, Tony, a pupil of Glyndor County Secondary School, the first schoolboy to travel on the hovercraft. Also on board was Mr. Tony Ward and his 20-year-old daughter, Rosemary, a cashier at the Odeon Cinema, who were among the first to book seats at the North Wales Travel Agency.
Rhyl really had something to look at when the hovercraft, unromantically called the VA3, made its appearance on the first ferry run between here and Wallasey. They had a boisterous day for it, but the craft made light work of heavy weather and rode on its cushion of air without a hitch. With a crew of 2, the 10-tonner will carry 24 passengers at about 70 miles an hour. It'll do the 19-mile trip in 25 minutes, as against at least 2 hours by road. This is by way of being a trial service until September. The Vickers are preparing VA4, a hovercraft of about 100 tons. As the craft rode a foot or so over the water, it had a rather bumpy ride. However, all the passengers enjoyed the experience. They were the first people to be carried commercially on a machine of this revolutionary kind. Hovercraft are in their infancy, and no one can say with certainty what their future will be. The Rhyl Wallasey ferry is the beginning of something which may have a tremendous future.
Also among the passengers was Mrs. Handley, the manageress of the nearby sports cafe. She had got to know all the crew of the hovercraft, as they had all their meals there, even a farewell party with a cake in the form of a hovercraft. It was by all accounts a tremendous sight to behold. As the hovercraft engines increased in power, the sound they made was reported to have been heard over 5 miles away, the sound carried by the incoming coastal wind. The hovercraft raising on its skirt, the huge fans blowing air and sand across the beach, was a sight to behold as it made its way to the sea to begin its journey. Newspaper reports of the time were full of excitement and glowing praise for such a wonderful achievement.
The ship that sails on sand, Hovercraft, arrives for world's first passenger service. Rhyl has proud place in the history of travel. After Telstar, Rhyl's residents and visitors have this week been privileged to see another miracle of scientific progress, the Vickers-Armstrong VA3, which arrived on Sunday to prepare for the first scheduled passenger-carrying hovercraft service in the world. Between Rhyl and Wallasey, it is due to begin as an experiment on Friday. Brought from Southampton to the Mersey by boat, the hovercraft called first at Wallasey and was then driven to Rhyl by Mr. Leslie Calhoun, test pilot and operations manager of Vickers-Armstrong Hovercraft Division. Throughout the early part of the week, both at its base at Horton's Nose and throughout its trials, the hovercraft has attracted the interest of milling crowds. It has attracted, too, the attention of television and the national and worldwide press, and its value to Rhyl as a publicity medium is inestimable. Apart from the prestige the town has received from being selected to play a proud part in the history of the development of travel, now that Wallasey has given its wholehearted approval to being the Wirrel terminal of the hovercraft service to be operated with the VA3 by British United Airways in conjunction with Vickers-Armstrong and BP, final plans are being made for the service this summer. The VA3 will be based and serviced at Rhyl, but will be refueled at Wallasey between trips. A well-known Rhyl man will be one of the refueling operators at Wallasey. He is Mr. Miriam Evans, 43 Clifton Park Road, who recently completed 25 years service with Shell Mex and BP. He has just spent a week at Southampton to get experience of the work of refueling and enjoyed a 2-hour cruise round the Solent and Southampton water in the hovercraft. Mr. Evans, a native of Henlon, is well known in the sporting life of the town. He is the present secretary and former chairman of the Rhyl FC Supporters Social Club. The post office in Rhyl are playing their part in officially marking the inauguration of the hovercraft service by franking letters with a special hand stamp. Mr. H. Fenner, the head postmaster, states that on July 20th only, all mail posted in a special temporary postbox at Rhyl Post Office will be franked with the stamp. The inauguration of hovercraft service just 50 years after first Irish sea flight. It was on April 20th, 1912 that on the beach at the Vorrid, not many yards from the hovercraft base, the residents of Rhyl waved farewell to Vivian Hewitt as he flew off in his Blériot monoplane to claim the honor of being the first man to pilot a plane across the Irish Sea. For the second time, the town of Rhyl on Friday experienced the unique distinction of being the springboard for a pioneering journey which should command a position of supreme importance in the history of travel, when Leslie Calhoun piloted the Vickers-Armstrong VA3 on the first leg of the world's first commercial hovercraft service, scheduled to run 6 times a day, 6 days a week until September 16th, as a joint experiment between Vickers-Armstrong, British United Airways and BP. The journey, expected to take 20 minutes, took a little longer than anticipated, and 32 minutes later the hovercraft docked at Leasoe Common, Wallasey, having completed its run at an average speed of 20 knots, 32 miles per hour. The anticipated 20-minute turnaround was almost achieved, and at 10:25, the craft commenced the return journey, arriving in Rhyl 15 minutes late. It is intended that the service will involve 12 crossings daily, 6 each way at mainly 90-minute intervals, and operate on 6 days of every week, with Tuesday being the exception.
Sadly, that first morning was about as good as it got for the world's first passenger hovercraft service. A series of mechanical difficulties would follow, as well as the unusually stormy weather that summer. The result of this was that, although the service was scheduled to end anyway on September 16th, it concluded 2 days early, and had only managed to operate at all on 19 days during the 2 months of expected service. In all, only 172 crossings were made, an average of 9 per day over the 19 days, instead of the expected 12, and a total of 3,765 passengers had completed the journey. At least the crossings that did take place were nearly fully subscribed, with an average of 22 passengers per trip, the maximum payload being 24. On what proved to be the final journey, the hovercraft left Wallasey at 1:15 on September 14th. Over halfway along the journey, the craft began to develop engine problems, leading to both engines failing en route. The craft limped slowly onto the Rhyl coast and made its way to its mooring at the Plasterian slipway near Horton's Nose. The service had only once managed 4 consecutive days of operation, August 28th to August the 31st, and had been off the water completely between September 1st and 10th for mechanical repairs. It had been a brave venture, but it all came to a sad end when, on September 17th, with a strong gale blowing from the northwest, the craft broke free from her mooring at Horton's Nose and started to drift eastwards towards the promenade. The Rhyl lifeboat was launched, and the skill of its crew resulted in the rescue of the 3 men aboard the hovercraft just 7 minutes before it struck the promenade wall. The once promising hovercraft service was now deemed unserviceable, and the expense of repair on site was deemed uneconomic. A pair of cranes was subsequently employed to lift and remove the badly damaged VR3 from the sea. With the service now cancelled and all hopes of it returning, the fate of the hovercraft was lost in time. Sadly, the hovercraft's fate was not a happy one. After a period of time, the craft was eventually repaired to a working model. It was shipped to the USA and ended its working life as a demonstration model. Following completion of this, it was destined to be scrapped and was then shipped back to the UK. It was then acquired by the Royal Navy. Its scrap hulk was to be used as target practice on the Solent. After it completed its use by the Navy, the Royal Navy attempted, unsuccessfully, to detonate a mine to sink it. As we have heard in a previous episode concerning the submarine, the Resurgam, and its demise sinking off the coast of Rhyl. It seems the sea this time wasn't going to let the hovercraft go as easily. When the explosion had failed to sink the hovercraft, a pick and hammer would succeed. A team of Navy divers hacked the bottom out of VA3 and it sank into the murky depths of the Solent. The mystery of the demise of the hovercraft was finally solved, but the story of the first hovercraft passenger service between Rhyl and Wallasey didn't end there, and it very nearly did something its nautical sister, the submarine, the Resurgam, Latin for I shall rise again, didn't achieve. In 2014, the following appeared in the Liverpool Echo newspaper, reporting a development in the story.
Hertfordshire-based Airspeed Hovercraft Solutions wants to run a service between Rhyl and Wirrel. It is currently looking at a landing site in West Kirby, a short walk from the town's Merseyrail station. The company's managing director says Airspeed has already lined up the necessary investors who would be prepared to pump in their money should the feasibility studies and business plans currently being drawn up indicate the project is financially and technically viable. Airspeed managing director Jeff Moole warns that it is not yet certain that the project will go ahead.
Sadly, it was not to be, and no further plans were put in place to develop this project to return the hovercraft to Rhyl. The story of the world's first passenger hovercraft service from Rhyl to Wallasey is a fascinating story of man's engineering achievements. Sad to think that not only Ryl's submarine the Resurgam and Ryl's hovercraft VE3 both met a watery end and now lie under the sea. Another fascinating story from Ryl's maritime past.
You have been listening to an episode of Rhyl Riddles, a podcast created, edited, and produced by Glenn Mitchell. Join us again for another journey back into Ryl's past. Subscribe, share the link to this podcast, and comment. Let us know what topics you would like covered in the next episode of this series.